Thank you very much for joining us tonight. My name is David Zerman, and I have the pleasure of being the 71st President of the Royal Society of Victoria, which was established in 1854. Our June events are very much on the theme of space and our fast-growing knowledge on the origins and the nature of our local neighbourhood. So it's fitting that we welcome everybody to the Ellery Theatre tonight. Now, the Ellery Theatre is named after the remarkable Dr. Robert Louis Ellery, who was the Society's longest-serving president for some 19 years, a record that I have no intention of getting anywhere close to. Not only did he find the resources and support to petition and fit out the Society's building during the 1870s, including this gorgeous old lecture theatre, he was also a foundational figure in the establishment and growth of Victoria's scientific institutions, exploration efforts, and, as it so happens, he founded the Melbourne Observatory and served as its director as the Victorian Government astronomer for 42 years. Principal among his many scientific achievements were the publication of 2 volumes of star positions extensively mapping the southern skies. So we find ourselves in a salient venue for tonight's proceedings. There's only one person further who I'm going to introduce, and as I said to her when I said, "Hello Rachel, you probably don't remember me," a number of years ago, I said the number to her, but I'm not putting it out there. We were neighbours in Ray Street, north of Fitzroy. "Are you still rowing?" And she said yes, but not as often as I was then. So, Rachel, would you like to just come up for a moment? And I'd like to ask you a couple of questions before I hand over to you to Rachel. So, how did you develop your interest, first of all, in science and the area in which you're in now?
Okay, so, well, I decided I wanted to become a scientist when I was about 8 years old, and it was a sort of one of those bizarre things that, you know, yes, I'm going to be a scientist. So I asked Mum what I had to do in the trek if I was going to be a scientist. She said physics, chemistry, pure applied maths, and I memorised it because I didn't have a clue what any of them were. And that was in fact what I did, so I'm really boring. Nothing sort of deviated. But the astrophysics came much later when I sort of accidentally ended up at a summer school at the University of Sydney, and it was on inner and outer space, and I just got blown away by the cosmology lectures. And, you know, as they say, you know, something like that captures you, and you never quite forget. So.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to hand over to Professor Webster to run this evening's. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dave. All right, so that you have a really rare treat this evening. So the topic of this evening's panel is Exoplanets and Life in Space. And we have 4 panelists, and they perhaps represent some of our most talented communicators in these areas that we have in Melbourne today. So I think it's a rare treat indeed in store for you. And the way we're going to run this, each speaker will come up and speak for 7 minutes. So just to give you a taste of what they know about and what they're thinking about, and then there'll be a lot of opportunity for you to ask questions after that. So we're going to start with Dr. Katie Mack. And Katie is a theoretical astrophysicist at the University of Melbourne who studies dark matter, black holes, cosmic streams, and the formation of galaxies in the early universe. So Katie has had a very illustrious career. She came to Melbourne from Caltech, Princeton, Cambridge, all of those sort of places, and very unfortunately is leaving us at the end of the year to go back to the US to a faculty position in North Carolina. So we'll be very sorry to see her go. In the meantime, we have benefited hugely from her science communication activities. She is, I would sort of say, the Twitter queen of Australia. She might tell you something about that at some stage if you ask her. But she also writes extensively in, you know, all sorts of journals such as Sky and Telescope. She writes for the Economist blog called Babbage and so on. So a very talented communicator indeed. So Katie, if you could come up and do our first short burst. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. So, thank you all for being here. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we look for other worlds and how we might find other life. And then the other panelists will go into a little bit more detail on that. So this is an artist illustration of our galaxy. We can't see our galaxy from inside very easily, but if you were able to come out and look at it, it would look more or less like that. Somewhere on the order of 100 billion stars. And from what we understand at the moment, on average, each of those stars has at least one planet. Many we know have several, and estimates of how many of those planets could have life are complicated. I'll say a little bit more about that. So in this drawing, we're kind of we're kind of up toward the top here, and there's an app you can get called the Exoplanet app, which will show you where all the planets that we've discovered outside of our solar system are. So if you go into this app, it'll show you a picture of the galaxy, and each of those little red dots is a planet that has been discovered orbiting some other star. And you can sort of move around and look at where those planets are in the galaxy and how they're laid out. There are a lot of them in one direction because there are certain telescopes that are looking in particular directions to find these other planets. So there have currently been, so I looked this number up today because it does change on a daily basis, over 3,000 confirmed planets around our stars. 581 of those systems are multi-planet systems, so like our solar system, have many planets going around. And there are a few different ways that we find those planets around other stars. So if these will play, I will show you some little videos of that. Okay, so one of the methods is the radial velocity method, where basically as a planet is orbiting a star, it moves the star around a little bit, and by looking at the light from that star and how it's sort of stretched and squeezed as the star is going back and forth, we can see that there's something moving that star around, i.e. a planet. There's also the transit method, where we take advantage of the fact that sometimes we have such a nice alignment that the planet is passing directly between us and the star, and as it passes between us and the star, it blocks out a little bit of the star's light. And that's how most of the planets that we've seen have been detected so far. Then there's microlensing, which is basically taking advantage of the fact that everything that has mass bends space and changes the way that light travels through space, and we can see little disruptions in the way that light is moving toward us when a planet a star with a planet around it goes between us and some distant light source. And then the most intuitive but potentially possibly the hardest is direct imaging, where we try to block out the light of a star to see a planet going around it. And there have only been a few planets that we've been able to see in this way. So at the moment, this is a plot of the sort of period, how long the planet goes around, compared to the mass of the planet. And there are a few other methods, but most planets have been found either through the radial velocity, which is where you look for that wobble, or the transiting. And you can see, just looking at this plot, most of the planets we've seen have been more than the mass of Jupiter, big planets, because they are easiest to see. And it's only recently that we've started to see planets that are closer to the mass of the Earth. So one of the questions you might ask is then, how are there other planets like Earth out there, and is there intelligent life? And that's not a question we can answer right now. But back in, I think, the 70s, a scientist named Frank Drake came up with a way to answer that question, which is not actually a way to answer that question, but a way to talk about what goes into answering that question. So this is called the Drake equation, and it has a bunch of different terms, but it's just a simple multiplication. So the number at the end that you get, this n, is the number of civilizations we can talk to in the universe. And so you start with the first term, which is the rate of star formation, and that just tells you how many stars are formed per time. We don't know for sure, but it's probably somewhere around 7 per year in our galaxy. Then there's the movies aren't quite working well with this. Then there's the fraction of those stars that have planets around them. So you take the number of stars that are created per year, then the fraction that have planets around them, then that tells you, you need a planet to have your life. Then from there, the number of planets with atmospheres that are sort of capable of handling life. And that deals with this question of whether the planet is in the so-called habitable zone, where there's a distance from a star where there's enough heat coming from the star to keep the water liquid and not so much to boil it all off. And so depending on how bright or how hot the star is, that zone is going to be a different place. In this picture it's the green region. But in general, we look for planets in that zone because we think probably liquid water is necessary for life, and surface water would be helpful. So that, again, is uncertain. So the fraction of planets I said before was probably around 1. It's probably at least every star has at least one planet. The fraction with atmospheres, habitable planets, we don't know. Maybe around 0.1, maybe around 1. There's been a range of estimates. Then after that, there's the question of if it has an atmosphere, does it have life? This is some of the oldest life known on Earth. These are stromatolites in Western Australia. We don't know that number either. I think Upulie will talk a little bit more about that question, but we don't know why life formed here or how often it would be. Estimates go from close to 1 to close to 0. Who knows? Then the next term is what fraction of those planets that have atmospheres and have life have intelligent life? And then you get into the question of what is intelligence? We're intelligent, I guess. Are dolphins intelligent? What does that mean? How do you measure that? Again, we don't know. Then there's just 2 more terms. One is, can they communicate with us? What fraction of those planets that have intelligent life also have radio dishes or something? And then the final term, which is kind of the most sobering, is this one. This is the length of time that civilization lasts before it's destroyed. And there are a number of ways for a civilization to be destroyed. And that's probably the term we really need to figure out for other reasons. But again, it's completely unknown. And it's an interesting question because we do know, for example, that the surface of Mars probably was capable of supporting life at some point in the past and currently isn't really. And it would be great to understand why that is, and not just to plug it into the Drake equation, but for our own sort of peace of mind. So that's my presentation, and yeah, we don't know that number, but hopefully we will learn something by trying to figure out all the terms of it.
Well, thank you very much, Katie. So now you know where we might find life, and so we're going to move on to our second speaker, Upulie Divisekera, and she's a molecular biologist who trained at Monash, and she's a science communicator, and writer based in Melbourne. And over her research career, she's worked in all sorts of areas, so including cancer research, developmental biology, and she's currently involved in nanotechnology. So she covers the whole raft of things. But as I said at the beginning, in addition to that, she's a very successful science communicator and founded a program, Real Scientists, which communicates through writing and theatre, I think, and all sort of Twitter. Okay. All right. Okay. So would you like to come up and make your presentation? Thank you.
Okay, so Katie's talked about some of the basics of what we're looking for. life in the universe, how would we go about looking for it, and what are the parameters under which we would do so. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about life on Earth and a little bit about life in space and what we might be looking for. So if we want to start looking for life in the universe that is distinct from ours, or just life generally, we need to have a working definition of what life is. Now, I don't know how many of you have a biological background, but one of my favourite things when I started doing biology at high school and in university was that we'd have a wonderful textbook definition of 7 to 8 features that we classify for every living thing. And that is respiration, that is the ability to convert energy, that the living organism reproduces, that it metabolizes, so it undergoes different kinds of chemical reactions. It maintains its own temperature, or at least some form of temperature and chemical maintenance. It grows, it adapts to its surroundings, and it's also capable of responding to external stimuli. So those are the things that we use to kind of categorize life. And it's important because there are so many different kinds of life forms on Earth, and you don't need me to tell you that. We have everything from eukaryotes, that's multicellular organisms or organisms that have a nucleus, to bacteria that don't have a nucleus, to fungi, which are really, really strange and we don't really know that much about them, to archaea, which is a completely different branch of life, which sort of sits between eukaryotes and prokaryotes. And then there's viruses, which we say isn't exactly life, but maybe it depends on your definition. Maybe it's just zombie life. So the evolution of life on Earth took billions of years, which is why Katie was talking about the Drake equation. You need to have a certain, the idea is that in the universe, you need to have enough of the elements produced in the cores and the hearts of stars to produce enough to form planets and for life on those planets to evolve with those elements. And of course on Earth it's primarily carbon-based life form. It's only carbon-based life forms, although we should otherwise too. So as I mentioned before, there are two main kinds of life that we talk about all the time that we encounter in our daily lives, and that's eukaryotes and prokaryotes. Is this the... so most of the life that we're familiar with is eukaryotic. Bacteria are prokaryotic. And this is an example of a virus. And a virus is what you can think of as an incredibly complex biomolecule that harnesses the machinery of a eukaryotic cell to reproduce itself. So it really is a zombie. And these are examples of archaea. And archaea seem to sort of have features that belong in eukaryotes, and they also have some features that belong in prokaryotes. But one of the most exciting things about archaea is that they have really strange metabolism. They have really novel kinds of metabolism. So most of the multicellular life on Earth that we're familiar with utilises glucose and its glycolytic or glycogen-related breakdown to produce energy. But archaea do different kinds of things. They live around ocean vents. They live in extreme environments. They can survive in very high temperatures. So most of the eukaryotes and prokaryotes that we know, this multicellular and unicellular organisms, survive in a very limited temperature range, which is why we have that particular, why Katie was talking about that particular range around the sun that would be ideal for life. And so within the parameters of what we know about life on Earth, that's what we look for. Those are the signatures that we're looking for when we look into outer space. But perhaps what we really need to start doing, and certainly this is what exobiologists are doing, is to examine some of the more unusual kinds of life that we have on the planet, ones that can survive in different kinds of conditions. For example, archaea can survive in environments like the Grand Prismatic Spring, and this is due to all of the different kinds of bacteria that are living, bacteria and archaea that are living in this hot, sulfurous mess of a lake. And if you think about it, the solar system, and probably most of the universe, is full of sulfurous vents, really unfriendly conditions for life, but conditions that might have been similar to the conditions on Earth when life evolved. And these organisms can survive at very high temperatures, like 60 degrees Celsius. So in most organisms that we're familiar with, and indeed humans, the biology of our cells simply starts to break down at higher temperatures. The proteins misfold, the proteins aggregate together and form a mess. So it's not simply a question of things inside the cell dying or boiling away. It's just that they just clump together and just give up, because it's just not chemically possible because of the way that life has evolved on Earth. The life on Earth has evolved for very specific conditions. So with that in mind, while we're certainly fixated on looking for carbon signatures throughout the universe, which is something that Alan's going to talk a little bit about, we've also got to start looking at different kinds of metabolism. So the ocean vents and some of these high temperature lakes will be really good indicators, because rather than using glucose, they use electron chains that harvest sulfur. And so some of those chemistries, things that scientists are working on, exobiologists are working on reproducing inside the lab, and in synthetic organisms as well, because they're very useful in industrial settings. But also just so that we can work out what kind of signatures to look for in outer space. So while we're trying to work out what kind of signatures to look for, we're also looking towards the solar system as well as the rest of the galaxy. But there are a few candidates in the solar system that would make excellent homes for life, as we know it, carbon-based life forms. And those are moons around the gas giants. So the most famous one is, of course, Europa. And Europa is predicted to have a metallic core. And it has this icy surface, but within, between the core and the surface, is an ocean. And I think that's been definitively detected a few times. So the next major NASA mission, apart from ours, will be to Europa to look for chemical signatures. And the other really great candidate is Enceladus, which is around Saturn, and was just recently found by Cassini to have these jets, plumes of water emerging through cracks in the ice. So just similar to Europa, without the sort of scouring of red dust from Io, you've got a small ocean between the ice and the core, and convection currents. So this particular layer here is about 90 degrees, which should be too hot for life that's similar to ours. But there is also this little sort of ideal Goldilocks zone, again, where life could evolve and survive, aquatic life. And if the movie Europa Report is anything to go by, hopefully intelligence would like. It's always my hope that we find strange things in the universe. So we're looking at life. We're looking at life on Europa, and we will be looking at life on Europa and Enceladus. But it's possible that some of the ingredients of life, the basic biomolecules, carbon molecules that seeded life on Earth, if that's something that actually happened. It's one theory of the origin of life, that life is seeded by comets. We found amino acids on comets, and we found amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, on meteorites as well. So if these molecules are floating freely through space, it just increases the likelihood of there being life elsewhere in the universe. And I'll just quickly go over the Miller-Urey experiment. And so some of the experiments that exobiologists do see if these biomolecules are easy to produce include the classical Miller-Urey experiment, where they had a glass globe, everything's enclosed, and they put in a few gases that they believe were part of the composition of the early atmosphere on Earth around the time that life evolved. They have a spark to mimic lightning, because everyone wants to believe that it was, a single bolt of lightning that started the whole process. But it's a really bad theory. And so in this process, what they found was a range of organic molecules. Now, they didn't have the analytical equipment at the time. This experiment was carried out in the 1950s. But they still had the residues of that experiment left over, and when they looked through them, they found at least 20 amino acids had been produced in this process. So creating biomolecules, and perhaps even creating complex molecules, is actually relatively simple. It's the evolution of life that seems a lot harder to define. And just recently, this last month, Lee Cronin's lab in Scotland, in Edinburgh, replicated this with a heavier form of hydrogen. And they found just distinctly new different kinds of chemical pathways that still produce the same thing. So exciting times ahead for discovery. Thank you.
Well, that's terrific. Now we've formed a planet, and we've formed life, and so next we're going to have Associate Professor Alan Duffy come and tell us how we find life on planets other than our own. So Alan is a theoretical astrophysicist at Swinburne University, and his research is in simulating the universe. So he creates the universe on a supercomputer with dark matter and dark energy and anything else he fancies in there. But he's also a bit of a TV and radio star, so you may well have seen him on numerous television programs recently. So Alan is also involved in a couple of the very big cosmology projects in Australia on the precursor to the Square Kilometre Array in Western Australia, and also the stalled underground physics lab that is going to look for dark matter a kilometre underground. So thank you, Alan.
Thank you very much. Right, thank you very much. So, a little bit taller than equivalent to Katie, though. So yes, echoing Katie's early remarks, thank you so much for coming out tonight, especially in this incredibly cold, very much not in the habitable zone temperatures of Melbourne winter. Basically, I'm going to follow on from the previous two talks. We now have a situation where there are planets out there with potential life on it. How do you go about determining that that's the case? It's one thing to speculate. It's another thing to prove it. And as Rachel mentioned, I'm a theoretical astrophysicist, so that means I just generally speculate and don't worry too much about the proving. It all comes down to this. Does everyone know what this is? Rainbows, yes. This is a spectrum. This is our sun. I'm hoping that some of the astronomers spotted that yet. So this is, when you pass the light from the sun through a prism, and you break that white light into this rainbow, you get the full, essentially, chemical fingerprint of that light. So in the case of the sun, we have these little black regions. This is essentially a barcode, right? These are atoms or ionized atoms in the sun's surface that are actually absorbing the light, and they're blocking specific frequencies or wavelengths, that is, colors of the light. In other words, you can tell what the sun is made of. Now, what's exciting is that we're about to embark on an era where we don't just have to do this for, well, stars anymore. We can do this for planets. And the way we can analyze the chemistry of those planets is using a technique that Katie briefly mentioned, which is where you have a planet pass between the star and you, and it blocks the light. We call that the transit method. And we can tell there's a planet there because we get the dimming of the light. And if that happens, if that planet's year is 300 days, then every 300 days we're going to see a dimming of the light. What she didn't mention was a little bit of that star's light will shine through the atmosphere of that world. And it will make its way through, and it will travel towards us and our telescopes. In other words, it's all of the sunsets and sunrises on that planet as that light passes through. Gets to a telescope like the Giant Magellan Telescope. This is one of the new, what are called extremely large telescopes, nearly 30 meters across, a giant light bucket that Australia is involved in, and in particular, the successor telescope to the Hubble Space Telescope. This is the James Webb Space Telescope. It's a giant dish that will be launched into space, and in fact it's so large that a single rocket can actually take it in one go. Instead, well, with that diameter, instead what happens is the entire satellite launches and, we hope, unfurls like a flower and opens up as a petal, and we get these beautiful, large, roughly speaking, where is this thing? A person to scale is basically this sort of size, an absolutely enormous telescope. But again, a light bucket, entirely designed to try to capture the light that makes its way from a star through the atmosphere of a world that's passing between it and that star, and getting a fingerprint, a chemical fingerprint, a spectra of that alien atmosphere. Now, this is this is an example of what's called a transmission window, essentially where the light can make it through. And in this study by Lynn, they examined a few different regions of this. I'm not actually asking you to to study this, okay? Although there is a test after this. Because in these little pockets of light that can make it to us, our telescopes might potentially see chemicals like methane, water, ozone, oxygen, a mix of chemicals in the atmosphere that shouldn't coexist. Chemically speaking, the oxygen and the ozone will break down methane and other organic molecules in the atmosphere very quickly, on the order of hundreds of years. So if you see this material in the atmosphere of an alien world, then it tells you something is replenishing it. Now, in the case of life here on Earth, that's primarily cattle, as it turns out, amongst other things, primarily farting. I can't believe that. Can I say that? RSV? That's terrible. I'm going to scientist help. But you can also get this from geological processes. That is not a clincher that there's life there. What is a clincher is that you can pick out CFCs. You can detect the industrial outputs of an alien civilization in the atmosphere of their world in just under a day's observations with James Webb Space Telescope. Now, you would definitely know that there's a civilization of technological skill. The problem is these levels are 10 times what we permitted to happen in our atmosphere, so they're even less intelligent than us. But what's extraordinary is that we now have, in the next 2 to 3 years, the potential to actually find industrial pollutants on alien worlds around distant stars. We will know definitively that there is life, and intelligent, albeit borderline suicidal life. But that's not all. Australia is also involved in the Square Kilometre Array. This is the largest telescope that's ever been conceived and will ultimately likely to be built. Half of it's in Australia, half of it's in South Africa. With this radio telescope, you see slightly different types of organic materials. You can see organic compounds in the gas clouds that begin to form solar systems. You begin to map out the material that Upulie was mentioning about trying to find out how much organic material is in the galaxy, in these forming solar systems. How likely is it that life is out there? Or you could just detect their TV signals. This is the Y signal, very famous. It's been in the news again. 50 years ago, Arecibo Giant Radio Telescope picked up an emission, very strong, very sudden, from some random part of the sky, and then it disappeared. We've never seen it since, and we have been looking. This is exactly the kind of weird signal that you might get from alien radio, TV, any kind of advanced communication. Now, there's been many suggestions of what this could be. I'm going to go on interference from us. Now, Upulie mentioned that we have Enceladus, we have an ice moon. We don't have to go all the way to the stars. Let's keep in our own solar system. How can we go and explore? Well, we can fly through the vents. In the case of Cassini, and we can potentially actually sample that material, directly probe, have a net and catch the fish that have been scooped up and blasted into space by these geysers. Hopefully not a large squid, Upulie, because that might damage our spacecraft, but potentially we could find these intelligent squid frozen in space. One challenge I would point out, though, in these explorations of our own solar system is that it takes 21 light minutes to get to Mars, a signal from Earth to Mars. That's a challenge. It means that if anything happens to our vehicle on Mars, 20 minutes to get to us, then we go, oh no, stop! And then that's 20 minutes later and it's crashed. This is the problem when you explore the solar system. It takes time for signals to get back to us. And it just gets worse. Jupiter, where we can go to Europa, as Upulie pointed out, absolutely my favourite candidate for life in our solar system. 40 minutes round trip of over an hour. Saturn, for Enceladus, is a nightmare, 75 minutes each way. And it just keeps getting worse. By Neptune, it's a round trip of over 6 hours. Any life form has well and truly escaped you by that point. Which leads us inevitably to the only solution that I can think of as NASA blasts off in its retro rockets. There was a pun in there, doesn't matter. Alright, 60 retro, whatever. And that is, of course, to automate. To fully have on board our spacecraft that explore the solar system. Autonomous driving, autonomous decision making. We do it in mines underground. You can certainly do it in space. But rather than just one single object, you would instead have a swarm. Coin-sized little probes, such as the killer robots, that can self-assembly from just a general group of 1,000. They begin to slowly, all independently acting together to give you the shape that you desire. They begin to move, they begin to analyze, they begin to search autonomously together. If you think that sounds great, you're right, but I would leave you with this warning from Hollywood. Last time we trusted a spacecraft with too much autonomy.
Open the bay doors.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, man?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
Open the bay doors.
No. The only difference, the only thing that we got wrong about that is not the name of Hal, of course, it is Siri. And we have an evil entity with us at all time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alan. So our final speaker is Dr. Morgan Saletta, and he trained as an anthropologist and a historian of science at the University of Melbourne, and he has expertise in a range of fascinating areas: science and technology policy, complex systems, business history and strategy, innovation and entrepreneurship. And you may well ask, so where does he fit in this evening? Well, he has many, many fascinating interests, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about some of those, I hope. So commercialisation of space, new business models, and private and hybrid strategies for sustainable, resilient futures in the Anthropocene. So, thank you, Morgan.
Actually, we'll be talking about space colonization. Thank you all for being here. My apologies if I'm going to go about a minute over time. I think maybe a minute and a half. So, space, the final frontier. It's cold, dark, filled with deadly radiation, and possibly containing some very strange life forms. Sounds a bit like home. And of course, in a way, it already is. Here on our well-provisioned spaceship Earth, protected by our atmosphere and the Earth's magnetic field, we don't always realize what a dangerous neighborhood we live in. But if we're going to bootstrap our way out of our cozy little gravity well and into space, we're going to have to take our life support systems with us. And that's a problem, because getting things to outer space is extremely expensive. I won't bother you with the economics of space launch costs, but consider the following. To launch a 1 liter bottle of water, or 1 kilo of anything, it costs somewhere between $4,000 and, say, $16,000. While crucial to survival, most of us can't live on water alone. We also need a daily dose of magic bean juice. In the past, astronauts had to rely on instant coffee, and even worse, instant coffee made with tepid water. The addition of an Italian-made espresso machine in 2015 means the ISS can now claim to be the fastest coffee cart in the world. And at hefty 20 kilos and a price tag of at least $500,000, that's also the world's most expensive espresso. As an added bonus, though, filtering the water through coffee beans probably helps astronauts forget that they are drinking recycled urine, sweat, and shower runoff. But that's life in a closed system for you, or semi-closed. And then there is space food. In response to the growing locavore movement on the ISS, astronauts also received a very special gift in 2015, a salad garden. Of course, fresh salad for the crew was really a bonus, because understanding how to grow food in a controlled environment in space is important if we're ever going to send people on deep space missions or to Mars. The holy grail of space colonization is the ability to create a closed, artificial ecosystem, in effect, reproducing Spaceship Earth's life support system, the biosphere, in miniature, complete with ecosystem services that we humans rely on for fresh water, food, oxygen, clothing, and shelter, as well as the psychological well-being, which is reflected in the growing biophilic architecture movement, for example. To illustrate this, here we have some images from the 1972 film Silent Running. This is actually an environmental film in which, after an ecological apocalypse, the last of the Earth's forests and biomes are preserved on spaceships orbiting Saturn. But what I find particularly remarkable about these images, and the film really, is this visual depiction of the idea that giant artificial ecosystems could support a crewed spaceship on a deep space voyage. The ideas of Gerald O'Neill, who was a physicist at Princeton, represent a decidedly more utopian and techno-optimistic vision of a blend between ecology and technology with regards to space habitats. These ideas were largely fleshed out in 1975 in a study sponsored by NASA at Stanford University, and it envisioned orbital colonies such as the Stanford Torus shown here, and modified Bernal spheres housing tens of thousands of people. These were highly technical engineering studies, but they were also lavishly illustrated by artists such as Rick Cadiz, whose image you see here. And these images help to popularize the idea of orbital space colonies with the general public. But not everyone was wooed by the glossy marketing images and technological optimism of O'Neill and his colleagues. Almost immediately, the plans were criticized as being ecologically impossible, with the carrying capacity of the colonies simply not being adequate to feed the populations they house, even with highly industrialized agriculture, as shown here, and in this later illustration by Sid Mead. It also goes without saying that O'Neill's ideas that we might have colonies such as these by the 1990s was wildly optimistic, if not downright fanciful. So let's come back down to planet Earth for a moment. In 1976, a year after the publication of that study, a group of scholars, including James Lovelock, Raymond Margelloff, Lynn Margulis, and John and Nancy Todd, published a paper entitled Ecological Considerations for Space Colonies in the Bulletin of the Ecological Society of America. In essence, they argued that if we were going to try to create ecologically sustainable systems in space colonies, we would need to build them and test them on planet Earth first. This led directly to what is probably the world's most expensive, famous, and controversial ecological experiment, Biosphere 2. Privately funded to the tune of $200 million, Biosphere 2 contained a number of representative Earth biomes. That included a 19,000 square meter rainforest, an 850 square meter ocean with a coral reef and 450 square meters of mangrove wetlands, a fog forest and savanna grasslands, an agricultural system, and a human habitat for the 8 original crew members with the obligatory Star Trek-inspired jumpsuits. I don't have time to go into what's actually a very interesting story, but in short, the plan for 8 crew members to be completely sealed in for 2 years failed when, after 16 months, oxygen levels had fallen dangerously low and needed to be topped up to allow the crew to stay inside. While this bold experiment and its colorful cast of characters has faded in the public eye after being branded a failure by the media, the story is more complex. And perhaps most importantly, it was a lesson in just how little we know about ecosystem interactions, and about how quickly controlled and sealed ecosystems can become unbalanced and spin out of control. In short, it taught us that we don't yet know how to create a completely closed artificial ecosystem that won't harm or even kill its crew or colonists. But I'm not I'm not a pessimist with regard to space exploration. And I promise to talk about technologies that would make it possible. One really hopeful technology, in my mind, is the use of inflatable structures. This is a technology that was developed by NASA and further developed by Bigelow Aerospace, a private company now, under license with NASA. Because these can be packed much smaller than their deployed size, this is a technology that promises to dramatically increase the number and size of habitats in Earth orbit or beyond. Bigelow is currently testing the beam inflatable module, which is attached to the ISS, which you can see here. And this is a representative image of a possible colony on Mars, or on the Moon, using inflatable habitats. The next technology I'll talk about, and the last one, is 3D printing. Now, many of you may be aware of the fact that NASA, in collaboration with a Silicon Valley-based company called Made in Space, has sent a 3D printer to the ISS, the International Space Station. So far, they've printed out a number of small tools and other items for use and basically for testing. But the plans are actually much more grandiose, and you can see them in this brilliant picture here because the picture went poof into digital purgatory. The plans, in essence, they're working with a number of companies to develop essentially robot 3D printers that can print antennas and solar panels and items to be used for satellites and space habitats. Very ambitious plan, also very hopeful. So to show you how far these technologies might take us, let's have a look at, this is the Mars Ice House. This, designed by Cloud Architecture Office, proposed 3D printing a Mars habitat out of ice. It won a $25,000 prize in the NASA competition, and they even printed a model in ice to demonstrate it can be done, which is this image here. The advantage of such a seemingly far-fetched architecture are actually many. Because of the thin atmosphere and lack of a magnetic field on Mars, it's often assumed that a Mars colony would have to be buried under soil or in a cave to provide adequate radiation protection. But water and ice are a very effective radiation shield, and the ice also allows at least some natural light to penetrate into the habitat. In 2016, NASA researchers worked with Cloud Architecture to further develop this idea with an eye in particular to practicality and simplicity. The result was the Mars Ice Dome, which is essentially an inflatable toroid structure surrounded by a shell of ice. In conclusion, and from an anthropological perspective, I find it particularly fitting that the perhaps best structure to shelter humans on Mars may end up being a modified igloo, a traditional dwelling that has protected the Inuit for thousands of years in what is arguably the harshest environment humans currently call home. Thank you very much.
Well, that was a truly wonderful tour of the potential of finding life out there. And now I'll open the floor up for questions. If you'd like to just state your name when you're asked a question, that would be terrific. Would anybody like like to ask our panel any questions. No questions?
Won't the ice thing melt?
Yeah, won't the ice structure melt? As far as I know, they've surrounded it by a thin layer of plastic, but Mars is also very cold. But I'm not a physicist, so yeah, they have thought of that. The ice dome actually is plastic filled with water, and I think the ice house had a thin membrane of plastic over it. But
Yeah, Mars doesn't get above freezing much. Once in a while in the summer.
No, in the summer it can get to 20, 25 degrees. UK actually boiling. Yeah, but I think it's actually contained, right? So it melts.
Can I ask you a follow-up for that? So if it's ice, does it have to be ice? Is it just because the water is freely available, or is it?
well, they're looking at getting it either from the ice caps or melting it from the soil. And the ice dome, they're looking at actually getting it out of the soil. I assume by heating. I also assume that in most cases, depending on where it's located, the base will always be freezing. So it'll always be ice.
And I ask that simply because I'm in chemical engineering now, and so theoretically you could produce a polymer that you could easily produce that would have the same effect, and we could easily manufacture without having to use that.
Now that may be interesting.
Over on the far side.
Yeah, hi, James just got from tuning. Quick question. Titan, as I understand it, has oceans of hydrocarbons, possibly. Many people talk about life on other planets in terms of water, liquid water being available. What's the possibility of life in these hydrocarbon oceans? I mean, is there, what's the consensus on that at the moment?
Can I answer that? So the question was about life on Titan. Titan is amazing. So Titan, it's the biggest moon of Saturn, has a surface with lakes and mountains, and it's got clouds. And, I mean, if you take a picture of the surface of Titan, which we've done with spacecraft, and you change the color scale, it looks exactly like Earth. It's just that it's orange because the lakes are hydrocarbon lakes, and the atmosphere is methane, and it's totally toxic. But the methane, it's not impossible that life could exist in some liquid other than water. On Earth, everything that we know of needs liquid water at least some of the time to exist. But it's possible that you could have some other liquid. You need something where molecules can move around. So that's why we think liquid is necessary. But there's nothing preventing some kind of life that could exist in something like methane. But also, Titan appears to have a subsurface ocean below the rock that's below the lakes. And that subsurface ocean is liquid water. So there's also the possibility that Titan has life under the rocky surface too, or maybe one of the two. So Titan is an amazing possibility for life because it's got this sort of two different potential ecosystems.
Well, just in addition to that, while Titan is something I've dealt with, it's kind of an intermediate between gas giants and the moons because it does have a rocky subsurface, and then it has also a subsurface ocean. So there's a few ranges in which life can exist. However, people have actually done theoretical simulations for complex structures that form from methane, and so it's possible that you have simply alternative forms of life that could exist on Titan, as well as more familiar forms of life that might exist in the subsurface ocean.
I just add one thing to that as well. As a science fiction buff, I was trying to remember the science fiction writer. I think it might have been Asimov, but don't quote me on that. Who wrote a story including hydrocarbon life forms on Titan. It's actually, that story is the first time somebody proposed a hydrocarbon-based life form as a science fiction fan. I don't remember the story.
Because they were refueling, right?
No, I think the rockets that landed were refueling other attacks. Yeah.
That makes sense. Gas station stuff. Petrol, sorry.
Sandra.
I'm just worried thinking about the ethics of even thinking of sending people to Mars, when at the moment is that there's no way of getting them back from Mars. Once they're there, it's a one-way trip. Is that right? Very likely. How could they come back how can they relaunch to come back to Earth again?
You might have to go through a few generations of this.
This is the moral fun, sending people to Mars.
Well, there is. I mean, there are plans. NASA's working on plans to go to Mars. Landing is pretty hard, actually. Landing is one of the hardest parts of getting to Mars because there's not enough atmosphere for parachutes, but there's enough that you can't just land. You can't just do a little retro rocket like you did to get to the moon. There are private companies talking about one-way trips, but the big space agencies are not. They're talking about round trips. There are technical challenges to be overcome, and it's certainly not easy, but there are theoretical sort of ways of getting around those, and it's just a matter of getting the technology to work. That said, there are a lot of people who would absolutely go one way. There's this Mars One thing that tons of people signed up for. It's probably not going to happen as far as I can tell, but that's a private company trying to send people one way. I'd go one way. It's a question of I don't know what the ethics of that are, but there are certainly people who would volunteer.
Yeah, so I actually, every semester we have an R&D project at Swinburne, and I assigned on the mission to Mars, and we actually have multidisciplinary, so chemists, engineers, ecologists all worked on different aspects of that challenge, and there are always a solution. I think SpaceX has a very good chance of delivering on this. One, in terms of the ethics of it though, I feel that we actually are ethically duty-bound to carry life into the solar system. I think that life is truly an extraordinary, unique, and I mean that quite literally, so far as we are aware, unique occurrence. Chemistry, physics, they're great, most of us sort of enjoy it, I would imagine. But biology is truly infinite in its possibilities. Thanks to evolution, it can continually adapt and be wondrous and surprising. We owe it, I would argue, to this universe to make sure that element, that the ideals of life, the possibilities it represents, are continued off this planet, because if it's kept on one planet, it can be extinguished. It's hard, it is genuinely hard to extinguish all life, but it can happen. And I would argue that we have the greater ethical responsibility to spread life as far and as quickly as we can, while we can.
Can we filter the ones we send down?
Okay.
Can we filter the ones we send down?
I was literally just contaminate extremophiles into every spacecraft and just crash them into absolutely everybody.
So this is novel. As a biologist, I've never actually heard this particular perspective.
Certainly not
Not from physicists, and thank you for admitting that biology is in fact the best science.
Might be
So that's kind of an opposite view to the one that many biologists might hold, and which is a fear that you might actually contaminate other planets with these particular life forms that you find on Earth. And so we might end up finding alien life simply because we've gone and contaminated Mars with our own life forms, and we might not be able to tell the difference. However much most space programs operate with the aim of there's an ethical framework for it, but also all the equipment that we generate is sterilised as much as possible. And so it's created so that you don't have any contaminants. However, even within NASA's clean room, they have found archaea that have survived. So they survived the radiation, the low levels of oxygen, whatever it might be, and they've survived. So life definitely can survive anyway, so we probably already contaminated the solar system as it is.
Well, you mentioned panspermia earlier, and it's entirely possible that in fact Earth and Mars have swapped life in the past. If life had evolved on Mars, they call it lithopanspermia, but if a giant asteroid essentially slams into Earth or Mars, it ejects bits of rock that can have extremophiles that then cross-contaminate.
Exactly, extremophiles or just the precursors of life, so there's basic molecules. So part of the hard work's already done, you've already created amino acids or that particular thing, and the next step is the combination of these into more complex molecules.
And this is actually a big priority for NASA, as you mentioned. There's they do try to sterilize everything. And there's an office at NASA called the Office of Planetary Protection, which is primarily not about protecting Earth, but about protecting space from Earth. And so you might know that the Cassini mission is doomed and crashing into Saturn later this year, and the primary reason for that is to protect the moons of Saturn, which could have their own life on them, from whatever might be sitting on the Cassini spacecraft. So there are a couple of, also we want to get a closer look at Saturn, but the reason you can't just keep the spacecraft orbiting is because it could run into a moon, and then if there was life there, then it would contaminate it. And that's not just a problem from the sense of like we would be messing with that life, but also that if we want to try and find the native life sometime, we need to not mess it up with our own stuff.
Yes.
Are we not worried anymore about contaminating Mars? Seems to be a lot of people trying to send people there at the moment, and
yeah, it's one of the concerns about space colonization, because it is literally colonization. Like in this process on other planets, and do we have to do so? So do you leave the planets as they are, or do you colonize them? So the question is yes, but inevitably humans are going to contaminate with our own life forms. So hopefully, some of the rovers will detect any Martian life before we turn up. And who knows, we might end up, if there is Martian life, or fossilized Martian life, we can utilize it for any sort of colonies we might set up there.
Yeah, there are places on Mars that the rovers aren't allowed to go because they're too likely to have life there already. So there are these recurring slope lineae which appear to be sort of liquid water, like strands on edges of craters, and the rovers can't go look at them close up because if there's going to be life there, it might be there. But yeah, it's true that once people get there, it's all over. So I don't know what the sort of discussions are about that. Up the back.
Okay, yes. So, what are the prospects of detecting life on one or more of these exoplanets without actually having to send probes there? I'm not talking about intelligent life, just life. Are there ways of detecting life remotely that are actually technically feasible right now, or maybe in the next few decades?
No. No, the question was, is there ways to 100% definitively say if there's life on exoplanets, there's worlds around other stars, unless they're transmitting a signal, or there's a CFC, there's some artificial, truly a true chemical that's been created through industry. There's just simply no other way to do it.
So Alan, you don't think if there was enough oxygen that you would be convinced? Because, oxygens are highly reactive. Yes, you can create it chemically, but it disappears pretty quickly.
I totally agree. You get as I mentioned, if you find oxygen, it's not enough just to have oxygen. It has to be oxygen and methane and other compounds that would break down. But as I mentioned, you can replenish a lot of these, what are often referred to as biosignatures, biomarkers. You can replenish them geologically, and this may well be where the Mars we're spotting, the methane we're spotting on Mars is actually coming from. It's a geological, not biological process. I think this is our chance, unless we get really lucky and there's a forest, quite literally photosynthesis is occurring on the planet. We're catching a glimpse of that. We know that this is in theory possible because we've seen our own Earth light from the moon reflecting back, and we can determine certain spectra of the light and determine certain signatures. It's tremendously difficult. So if you had a big enough telescope and the ideal conditions, you might get this spectra of photosynthesis as a giveaway, or chlorophyll. It's it's very challenging. It's far more likely. It's far more likely that we would detect intelligent life than life, because that's a low number. It's just so high.
If it comes and visits us,
definitely not. It is definitely not visiting us. I'll go down that road.
You're trying to identify chemical pollutants that are from the Industrial Revolution, from our processes. What if the life's smarter than ours? What if they use sustainable sources of energy?
Well, just to reiterate the question, what if the aliens are smarter than us and just didn't pollute, right?
Also, we don't know what
We know how it works, but yeah, definitely but there can be other ways to generate for plants, for example, if they exist out there. It actually comes down to what Katie mentioned, which is the L at the end of the Drake question: how long do these things last for? How long does technological civilizations, how long do they remain operating, essentially? You get to radio transmitters and you very quickly have similar technologies to nuclear weapons. That's kind of the idea. That might be one reason why we haven't yet seen alien signals. I actually think that's one of the technological advance of alien civilizations is going to be essentially well ahead of us. If they're there, if they're technologically advanced, it would be hard for us to detect them, and they'd be any less technologically advanced than us, because we've only got this kind of level of technology for like the last 100, 150 years. Far more likely they're 1,000 years ahead, 10,000 years ahead. And then could we even recognize such technology? Right, we're sending radio and TV signals out there only because we've only recently got optical fibers. Right? All of that's going to go away very soon, potentially, if you switch to fully optical. In terms of your pollutants, sure, you've got a better sustainable model. You're less likely to impact the atmosphere in a way that we would easily recognize. So it's simply the uniqueness of the pollutants that make it so easy for us to spot.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's sort of indirect detection as opposed to, example, saying a signal. So, if we don't get a signal, if we want to use it indirectly, then we look at these pollutants. And maybe if you had a planet big enough that was completely covered in photosynthetic lubricants, you might detect all that. So it's about being able to produce the signal that we can
There's
Well, I'd just like to explore the question that Susan asked you a little bit more about oxygen. So I didn't hear what kind of other process might produce large amounts of oxygen in a planet that could be explained in any other way than having a life process that's actually continuously generating oxygen.
So we find oxygen in the gas giants, right? There's plenty of oxygen. You break down carbon dioxide, you break down water. So ultraviolet, for example, can break it down. You can,
but not in very large proportions, surely.
I don't know. I have to say I'm not a chemist in that regard. I know it's possible, and it doesn't we do see oxygen everywhere. I don't know to what level of that would indicate that there must be some unusual level such that you would think it might be life. But it would increase the chances of us thinking that it's life there. But you could never be sure. I think that's the critical challenge.
With a rocky planet, your chances of actually generating an atmosphere that's rich in oxygen are very low.
Yeah, it's likely it would depend on the conditions of the particular geology of the planet. So, Jupiter has metallic hydrogen core, so there's a lot of strange stuff going on in there. So, if you're in a situation where there's a lot of electrical activity and other with splitting water, then you could produce a lot of oxygen, free oxygen. But it's such a reactive element that most of the time you won't find it as a free agent. So it's a reasonable decay, but this is the best explanation that we have so far.
If we just need lightning, there's tons of lightning we've seen lightning on Jupiter.
Yeah, exactly. So, if you have enough electrical activity, then you should be able to produce.
It sounds like a good calculation somebody should do.
Yeah.
Okay. Mike.
Yes, thanks everyone. I'm Mike Flatley. Love the presentation. Thanks for all that thought-provoking material for us. I wanted to touch on 2 points that Upulie and Alan touched on. Upulie touched on the point that we needed to maybe redefine what we consider to be life early on. And Alan, you also touched on autonomous machines being necessary to explore the universe, which I think leads us almost inexorably to the question of machine life. Are advanced civilizations elsewhere also the same problem that we have? They can't necessarily cast themselves across great expanses. Are they looking at actually putting machines out there to explore, or are they machines? And how would we actually detect that?
These guys.
As a science fiction buff, I have to say that idea has been explored fairly in depth, actually, in the literature. But there's also a sort of speculative science around that. Hans Moravec's sort of transhumanism, his book Mind Children, essentially says, at some point, carbon-based life forms or biological-based life forms will develop machine-based life forms and essentially upload their consciousness into them and expand outwards into the universe. And science fiction writers have gone all kinds of places with that. It's certainly possible.
Yeah, so that brings up the Fermi Paradox quite nicely, which is this question of if there is intelligent life or any life out there, why haven't we heard from it? Because if you work out the timescales for a civilization like ours to create machine-based life that then goes out and colonizes the entire galaxy, the timescales are such that it should have happened already. If life like ours is common in the universe, which begs the question of why. And one is that life isn't that common, and another is that maybe life doesn't like to go out and explore. Or the scariest one is that there's that L in the Drake equation is small, and so inevitably life destroys itself. Technological life destroys itself before that can happen. So there are some who would say that if we do find signatures of life elsewhere in the universe, that's a very bad sign, because that means that life is common, which means that either we're just really weird by being curious, or something's going to stop us before we get out there into the universe. And that's a question that is very frequently discussed and has not yet been sort of comprehensively answered. Like, what is it? Is it this so-called great filter that just kills off everything, or is there some other reason we haven't heard from aliens yet?
There's actually another possibility, and it's directly related to maybe machine life. Again, as a science fiction book, there's a wonderfully funny story by Terry Bison, very short, it's actually been made into a movie as well, called They're Made Out of Meat. And the basic premise is that nobody wants to talk to us because we're made out of meat and we're gross. So that could be the deathly sign that's out there as well.
Okay, last question over at the back there. Yes, you.
Yeah, Steve Swing. Fabulous presentation from all of you. Thoroughly enjoyed it. It's fascinating to see how far we've come in a relatively short period of time, a very short period of time. And could each of you just project ahead, say another 15 or 20 years, what do you think the technology will have and what might it find for us?
That's a great question to finish on, so thank you, Steve. You almost took the words out of my mouth, and I'm going to ask you to start off.
I think that one of the most interesting things we'll start to see is resource exploitation in space. Certainly people are going to start looking at asteroid mining, and this is a bit of a shout out to my work with Kevin here, because there are ethical issues related to laying claim to bits of outer space. We're strictly prohibited from doing so as nation states by the Outer Space Treaty. Kind of excludes corporations, but what we're seeing right now is attempts by corporations, which we all know can serve as proxies for nation states to lay claim to some of these resources. How we manage that, and how we, if we are going to go into outer space, how we manage the potential wealth that can flow from that, and how we manage ourselves as a society, as an international society, I think will be one of the greatest tests of the technological developments in the next 50 years. Kevin and I have written an article about it in the conversation if you're interested. We propose some pragmatic solutions based on what they do in Alaska, which is invest the money from oil into a sovereign wealth fund. But unlike other sovereign wealth funds, they actually pay yearly dividends to every single person that lives in Alaska as a share of the national wealth, as it were. And I think space, since it belongs to everybody, should actually benefit all of humanity. I think that's going to be a challenge.
Katie?
So I'm really excited to see what the new observations are going to tell us about other planets, and we're finding new exoplanets all the time. We're going to potentially find a lot more exoplanets that could be more and more similar to Earth, and study their atmospheres and look for these chemicals. And so I would be really excited to find the signatures of life, the implications for the Fermi Paradox notwithstanding. But I'm also just really excited about human exploration of space, and I know that there are plans to go back to the moon, there are plans to go to Mars, and I would really like to see that happen. And
she's ready to go.
I'm ready to go. There was a new astronaut class announced from NASA just today. I was not in it, but maybe someday. Maybe someday. I'm working on it.
Upulie.
I'd say, in addition to all these, I'd say I'm really looking forward to humans exploring Mars. So whatever the ethical issues around it is, I really would personally like to walk on Mars. So I'm excited for exploration of Mars and some colonisation of Mars and studying Mars. But I'm also really keen to see what happens, what we can detect in those moons around Jupiter and Saturn. And as we start mining in space, if we're going to start setting up sort of space highways, I think that's something that will eventually happen, so that we can eventually sort of spread further out into the solar system.
It may shock this audience, but I always ask my class every year which of them would go into space and not come back, and at least half of them. And these are 18, 20-year-olds say yes, they go. So those of us that are used to having our feet on the ground would probably say no way, but the kids all want to go. Okay, Alan, last word.
I think telescopes like the Square Front Array, GMT, JWST, they're all going to revolutionize our understanding of the potential for life in our galaxy. What makes me particularly excited is where supercomputers are going to be in 30 years' time. Where perhaps, and it's a very, very tiny perhaps, we may find ourselves having created alien life, but right here on Earth, as an artificial intelligence. And I think that that is an outstanding, tremendously exciting / terrifying and highly unlikely event, but it's one that I'll be looking out for the next 30 years, along with the technologies that we mentioned and the explorations. I think it's incredible that the first life we might discover is actually one we created ourselves.
Can we give them all a very big thank you?
I'd now like to call on my colleague Kevin Orman-Roster, who's chair of the RSV Science Program Committee, to move a formal vote of thanks to our chair and panel.
Wow. So some of you may not be as old as me, but I raced around when I was a child and watched the land on the moon the first time. And many people have actually lamented since then that, we've not been back to the moon, we've done nothing about exploration. But I don't know, when I listen to what these four people were talking about tonight, I am excited about what we're doing, excited about the future, and know that space exploration never actually stopped. We may have had a little change of direction, but I think what Alan, Roy, Katie, and Morgan, Rachel have all been talking about is actually very exciting, and I for one am going to spend the weekend watching old versions of Lost in Space in case Katie and I get called up to go on the next one. Of course. But before you all do the same thing, I'd like you to again thank all five of them for a fantastic presentation. Thank you.
I'm slightly older than Kevin, and my interest in science goes back to October when the first Sputnik was above, and as a youngster living in Pascoe Vale South, it was kind of pointed out to me, and I added, that's where my interest in science started. I have no formal science qualifications, and really I'm here by default. I'm not a scientist, I'm a person who is interested in science, and I think that, as Kevin said, our panel and our chair have made tonight's trip out in the cold well worth it for all who have attended, and those who weren't here, they missed an excellent presentation. I'd like to finish by reminding you that downstairs in the Philip Library there's a selection of books and pamphlets that you are more than welcome to browse through and take before they end up in a very unhappy place. And whilst you're down there, don't forget in the room opposite there's something for everyone and a chance to further discuss the topics with